please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Now let's get straight to the big news point then. Just a day after RBI Governor Urjit Patel broke his silence on the PNB fraud, the Finance Ministry has reacted to it. Now a top Finance Ministry official has responded to CNBC Awaaz on Urjit Patel's comments. North Block claims that the RBI has enough powers to regulate bank branches. Not just that, the ministry official said that the RBI is the only entity which has supervisory role over the loan account. The official also added that the government only has ownership rights over the banks and it does not interfere in its administration. Well, even as the war of words continue, here is veteran of the banking industry, the founder of ICICI Bank, asking for the blame game to end so that PSU banks can be fixed in all earnest.
The mess that has been created today in the banking sector is to a large extent owes itself to the fact that the banks have been under the public sector for 50 long years without any improvement whatsoever in their working. And I think Urjit Patel has hit the problem right on its head.
Do you think that we could retain the legislative framework but merely abolish the banking department and go ahead, or do you think the law needs to change?
Yeah, in fact, I would go for a very strong measure. I mean, you may say that I'm pretty old and I can take a very radical view of this matter. But in 1991, Mr. Narasimham did contemplate the idea that the government's ownership of government's control over the banks are no longer justifiable. If the government's control over the banks are no longer justifiable, I don't see any logic for the banking department to continue to function. I think the Reserve Bank of India should be the sole and only authority in order to supervise and regulate the banks. And I saw today a statement by Bimal Jalan, who said that if public sector banks are privatized, who will lend to agriculture and small-scale industries? I think for 50 long years we have been lending. And private sector banks are also obligated to lend to the priority sector, which consists of agriculture and small-scale industries. That is no longer the problem. The problem today is what Urjit Patel has said, that the duality of control will have to go. And if this... ultimately, in the PNB fraud, those who perpetrated the fraud, those who facilitated the fraud, those who had knowledge of the fraud or ought to have known the fraud existed, will have to be dealt with. But the larger issue of where does it lead us to, the larger issue of the autonomy of the public sector banks, I mean, that I think will have to be raised to the fore. Instead of merely going on debating as to whom should be blamed for this, whether the Reserve Bank of India should have known about this, should have prevented this, such questions are no longer relevant. I think we should confine our issue that those who are guilty will have to be punished. And move along in it. How are we going to stop such issues from coming up to the fore in the future? The only way in which you can stop it is to give that autonomy to the public sector institutions and have the right people there. And the only persons who can decide who are the right people must be the Reserve Bank of India. It can't be a whole lot of people.
Dr. Urjit Patel makes the same statement. He says public sector banks don't have market discipline. They are not worried that their deposits will be pulled out even if a fraud or a large NPA is created. So would you say, government stake has to come down below 50%? Is that the way out?
These two issues will have to be separated, Latha. One is the control function, another is the ownership function. I think Mr. Narasimham, I should credit him with this statement 27 years back, that you can segregate these two functions. It does not matter who owns the banks. What matters is who controls the banks. And today, it's not very clear who controls the banks. Is it the central government which is controlling the banks, or it is the Reserve Bank of India which is controlling the banks? Now, while in 27 years back, there is no problem whether the government owns or not. Today, I think it has assumed a further significance because it doesn't make sense for the government to continue to own even 51% or 60% of the banks. Because the government needs money for a whole lot of other purposes. Why should they continue to hold it? If they are going to give up control, I think they can as well give up that ownership. And so that means that amendment to the legislation.